Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Saddleback webinar this week. My name is Liz Mangus, and I'm a literacy specialist with Saddleback Educational Publishing. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I can say this now for the third week in a row. Happy summer. I know for some of you who are getting an early start to the school year, some districts are starting in like another week or two. So, but it's still summer right now. So let's live in the moment. Get comfortable, get a nice beverage. Hopefully you're joining us from a beach somewhere, and we're going to have a great conversation today. As you are logging in, please locate your control bar, which is on the bottom of your web browser window. This is how you are going to communicate and interact with us today. So first and foremost, you want to know where the chat is. Find the little chat icon and make sure that when you communicate with us today that you're choosing all panelists and attendees from the little drop-down menu there. That way everybody who is signed in with us today can see what it is you have to say. So select all panelists and attendees when chatting with us today. The Q&A area is obviously going to be for your questions, either for Saddleback or for our presenter today, Dr. Mandy Stewart. And if you would like to take advantage of subtitles, please go ahead and select live transcript and then click show subtitles, and you'll be able to take advantage of that. We'll get started right at 3 o'clock Eastern time. Good afternoon, Vivian. Nice to see you. Vivian joins us every week, and we appreciate her so much. We'll get started in just a few minutes. While we're waiting, here is where you can find us on Twitter. So Saddleback is on Twitter. Dr. Mandy Stewart is on Twitter. Let everybody know you're joining us today for this conversation. If you happen to be catching the recording, you can still tweet. We appreciate that. So follow us, say hello. We always love to hear from you. All right, while we are waiting, we have about 2 more minutes before we'll get started. Let's say hi to Mandy. How are you?
Hi, Liz. Thanks for having me. I'm doing good. Thank you.
We're very excited that you're here. And I'm looking at the chat. Yes, please go ahead, select panelists and attendees. Let everybody know where you are joining us from today. We have international audience today. All right. Welcome from Indonesia. Welcome Iran. Welcome Virginia. Do we have more than one person on from Indonesia today? Welcome, welcome. This is fantastic. All right.
People from Fort Worth, Texas. That's where I started my teaching career. So Fort Worth is always near and dear to my heart.
Welcome, Fort Worth. Welcome, Dallas. Hello, Wisconsin. Hello, Edmonton, Alberta. Oh, I'm so excited. I could sit here all day and watch people say hello and let us know how's your summer going? Is anybody doing anything fun? Is anybody on a beach right now? That's what I want to know. Well, Joanne's in Panama City, Panama. Thank you for joining us. Wow. Okay. Well, clearly I'm not on a beach, but that's okay because I'm having a great day. Oh, wow. We are so honored that you're here, everybody. Thank you very much. Okay, well, it's about that time. Oh, 9 days on the beach on a vacation. You deserved it. Seriously. I mean, good for you, Jeannie. I'm so glad to hear that. Okay. All right, welcome everybody. Let's get started. Okay, our topic today is creating a multilingual ESL classroom. So as you know, if you are a regular viewer of our webinar series, you know we're always talking about the strengths and the assets of our students. And this is another webinar that really talks about the strengths-based approach to teaching students who are learning English. And it's just full of great information, and I think you're going to love it. Our presenter today is Dr. Mandy Stewart. Some of you may know her from this book right here. I see many of our followers on Twitter, and they tweet about having this book. So this is her book. She's co-author of that book. Let me tell you a little bit more about her. So she loves teaching ESL. She began her career teaching middle school at a newcomers academy, and she has taught adult learners in formal classes and through an ESL book club at a public library. She is currently an associate professor of literacy at Texas Women's University and the co-director of the upcoming Masters of Arts in Multilingual and Multicultural Studies. Her research promotes the biliteracy of adolescent emergent bilinguals, focusing on literacy engagement through a multilingual lens. She is co-author of But Does This Work for English Learners? A Guide for English Language Arts Teachers, grades 6 through 12, and it's with Corwin, published with Corwin. If you don't have this, definitely check it out. It's a great resource. Mandy, thank you so much. We're thrilled that you're here, and we can't wait to hear everything that you're going to share with us today. So I'm going to let you take it from here.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Thank you, Saddleback, for having me. I want to thank all of you for coming to this webinar and all the other Saddleback webinars, because that tells me that you deeply care about the students who I am passionate about, students who are in the dynamic process of English acquisition, who are by default bilingual and multilingual students. So that's why I want to take you on a journey with me that is sometimes a little uncomfortable as an ESL teacher, because we teach English, right? That's so much of what we do. But I think as we start to see our students as multilinguals, we can understand some very innovative ways where we can leverage all of their languages to give them more access to the curriculum, engage them in critical thinking, and a lot of creativity. So thank you for being here. And I will be pausing at about 3 or 4 different places throughout the presentation to answer questions. So at any point, if you want to ask a question, please put it in the question box, and Liz will voice those later on. So here are a couple of my books, and what I'm talking about today comes from both of these. The most recent one is with award-winning teacher Holly Genova, who teaches high school newcomers, and has been just such a phenomenal person to work with. So some of these ideas come from work that I have done with her in her classroom, as well as some work I've gotten to do with teachers in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, as they allow me to come into their schools and try out some of my crazy ideas with their students who are acquiring English. So here's a little bit of my journey. I started my teaching career in 2000. So this picture is from 2005. It's blurry. It's before we had phones that had great cameras on it. So it's from one of those throwaway cameras that some of you don't even know what it is. But here are some of my students at a newcomer academy. Here I am a few years later in my role as a researcher who still likes to be a teacher, going in to a high school and doing a language and literacy institute with students who really just impacted me so much that summer. Here are some of the students who are all, they have refugee status, and I do not speak any of their languages. So a lot of people ask me, well, Mandy, we know you speak Spanish and you can do this, but what about other languages? And I spent a whole summer with these students and other students, none who spoke Spanish, and we created a multilingual ESL classroom. Here I am getting to work with some teachers and try out some innovative ideas with them. I love to go in and support teachers working with their students acquiring English, whether they're newcomers or long-term English learners, and try and discover different innovative techniques that will work with them. And here I am this past academic year. I know some of you can relate to this. Most of the interaction that I was able to have with adolescent students was through Zoom, because of course school districts did not want to let an outside researcher in, understandably. But even with a mask on, I had my most amazing teaching experience in Dallas in a shelter where they were housing young men who are unaccompanied minors, mainly from Central America. And I had the most amazing experience sitting on a concrete floor for hours, surrounded by books, and teaching them with my mask on and their mask on, even though I know that is so difficult, making meaning through and across languages with a mask. But despite that, it was my most amazing teaching experience ever. So as we get started, I just want to go over a few things about taking a multilingual perspective. So I consider myself an ESL teacher with a multilingual perspective, and a lot of the teachers I work with do as well. So these teachers affirm their students' cultural and language identities. They do it through their curriculum and their instruction. This teacher commits to asset-oriented literacy instruction, because all of our students who are English learners already have a language, and language is one of the most amazing assets we have. Even if we might have students who don't know how to read and write in their language, in their home language, they still have language if they can communicate and make meaning through oral language, signs or any way. So their language that they already have is a huge asset. And then this teacher purposefully, and that's the key word, I'm going to bring that up a lot, purposefully engages students with English, because yes, we are ESL teachers, and home languages in the classroom. And you're going to see home language / languages a lot in my presentation. It's because recently I've been made aware that many of the students I get to work with in schools or in shelters, they already are bilingual, biliterate, and bicultural before they come to my classroom. That English is really a third language for them. So that's why I say home language or languages. So it's important for us to remember that just because we take a multilingual perspective, it doesn't mean certain things that are sometimes assumptions with the multilingual perspective. So this teacher does not stop pursuing second language acquisition in the classroom. Absolutely not. I am an ESL teacher with a multilingual perspective, and English acquisition is very important in any classroom setting I'm in. And this teacher also does not take a willy-nilly approach to language instruction. So by that, I mean a lackadaisical approach, a haphazard approach. I use the term willy-nil instead of nilly. I'm from the country in East Texas, but my publisher politely told me that willy-nil is not a phrase, it's actually willy-nilly. So I put that in there correctly for them. But this teacher doesn't take a willy-nilly approach. And this teacher certainly does not have lazy students. The students are being guided to purposefully use different languages at different times for the end goal of English language acquisition, academic achievement, social and emotional success. The students are not lazy. So I know for a lot of us who have been trained in ESL and TESOL language acquisition, we might just need to step back for a minute and reimagine these rules that we have been taught or we have just grown up with. And these rules for literacy and language acquisition could look a little different. So we might just have to give ourselves a minute to just think about things in a different way. What I have seen as I've gotten to spend years either having students in my own classroom or literacy institutes or going in and working with so many different great teachers is that when we take L1 literacy and combine it with L2 literacy, there is the potential for exponential literacy and language growth for our students. So we can really set them up for success. So I'm sure because you are here at this Saddleback webinar that you are already involved in providing your students engaging and accessible literature in English. That's why you're here. So don't stop doing that. Absolutely not. That is so important. But I want to add to that. And let's find some engaging and accessible literature in their home languages. I know you already provide students opportunities for your students to express their learning in English, the second language, with appropriate scaffolding and structures to support them. Now I want you to think how you could also do that at certain times in the school year for their home language or languages. So I hope you already have these engaging, high interest and accessible books in your classroom library that Saddleback and other publishers provide. Certainly that is so important. In fact, from my experience personally as a language learner, as a mother of language learners, and certainly as someone who has dedicated their career to language and literacy instruction, I think the sweet spot of second language acquisition is when you are reading in that target language and you are comprehending and you are so engaged. I think that is the sweet spot for second language acquisition to occur. So definitely keep doing that. But I want us to think about some concepts that might push us to also think about our students' home languages. You're probably familiar with L1, first language. I want to expand your notion of L1 to consider many students might have multiple home languages, maybe some they learn simultaneously. For example, it could be Luba and Lingala, Spanish and Cachiquel, and other examples. So L1 could really be more than one language there. L2, we usually think of that as our target language. In our case, it's probably English. But remember, for some of the students I've been working with recently, they're acquiring English with me, but it's really their third language. And I'll show you some examples in the presentation. LOTE, languages other than English, which we'll look at today. I've already mentioned home language or home languages, and I hope you will be doing more after this presentation than just looking at the home language survey, which you would have for your students if you're in the US. Target language for us, that is probably English. These might be terms you're already familiar with, but now I want you to put on your bilingual education hat, not necessarily because you teach in an officially bilingual program, but because you teach bilingual students. So I want us to think about how we can work toward biliteracy for our bilingual students as they draw from their full linguistic repertoire to acquire English and have academic success. Some of you have probably heard the term translanguaging. I know it's been all the buzz in a lot of professional organizations, resources, and literature. So let's look at that for a moment. Ofelia Garcia and Li Wei, among others, describe translanguaging as having the power of an ATV, like you see in this picture here. Now, some of you, like me, probably don't have ATVs. You don't do this. Maybe you drive a boring mob mobile like me, a minivan. I know it was station wagon back in the day, SUV. Maybe that mom mobile is great for what you need. You can put your car seats in there. You can put all your kids' sports equipment. It probably has some goldfish or remnants of goldfish in the corner, maybe a cheese stick that's getting a little moldy and other things, and it fits our needs. But let's remember, our students might be very different from us. Our students are bilinguals, and maybe we are not bilinguals like them in the same situation, or maybe even some of us are monolingual. So the vehicle we drive, if we can think of our linguistic repertoire as our vehicle, is different. So we want to help our students who are all bilinguals draw from their full linguistic repertoire, everything they have to learn. So it will be leveraging the power of the all-terrain vehicle, the ATV, and they can do super cool things with their linguistic repertoire that you'll see later that maybe we don't have access to. And here's the word I want to continue to bring up, purposefully. This is purposefully, not willy-nilly, but purposefully using all of one's language skills in all domains, reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And I think we're able to take that view if we have a multilingual view of our students. So I want you to think for a minute, who are our students who are acquiring English as an additional language? And how do we view them? We might view them as English language learners, second language learners, English learners, and certainly those are all terms many of us are very familiar with, and it highlights their process of acquiring English and our need to focus on English acquisition, which is very true. But our students are more than that. So we need to open the door and see them as really who they are. They are emergent bilinguals. They are bilingual and multilingual people. You see a picture here of one of my former graduate students, Profe Ross, with a couple of his students, and I'm going to share some of the work from his classroom today. He certainly takes a multilingual view of his students, and the work they are able to produce is amazing. But I always get this. People say, Mandy, come on, I don't speak my students' languages. I've got 18 different home languages represented in the class. I could not learn them all if I dedicated my life to it. Are you serious? And yes, I am, because I am someone who works with students whose languages I don't speak, and I'm still able to draw in literature and other learning experiences in the home language. I work with teachers who do this in a very expert way. You have to be open to thinking about things differently, but I think it definitely is possible. The first thing you need to do is know your students. like really know them. So I have linked in this PowerPoint, and you will all receive a PDF of this, a language survey that Holly Genova and I published in our book, but does this work with English learners. This language survey is available for you free on Corwin's website, and they have it for you in English and Spanish. I also have it on my website in Korean. Not that this language survey is the end all be all. You can create your own, but I think it's so important that we have a way to understand very important information about our students that can become very useful to us as ESL or TESOL professionals. So information you want to know are their parents' languages, the languages spoken at home, and if you can find out who speaks these languages and what context, if there are multiple languages involved. Find out about your students' previous educational experiences and all of the language instruction they have had in and out of school. When I get to know students, sometimes I find they are getting a lot of L1 home language instruction in a community center, in a place of worship, in the home. So find that out. And even though this is not in the language survey, but in the first few chapters of the book with Holly Genova, we help teachers try and understand how you can know your students' reading, writing, listening, and speaking abilities in English, and maybe more information than you're getting from those standardized tests, as well as their home languages, by taking note of some things you see in the classroom as you develop this multilingual classroom. And certainly know about your students' language usages outside of school. A lot of information, I know, and I hope that language survey will at least be a beginning place for you to start, or the first few chapters in the book. But I think when we know our students, we can be much better educators. So here are some examples. A few years ago, I had the wonderful opportunity to do a summer literacy institute with newcomer students in a high school. They all had refugee status. They all spoke languages that I do not speak. And one of these students was Lei Suong, or the pseudonym I will give her is Lei Suong. Lei Suong came to me, and Saddleback would love this because she said she did not like reading because all she had were those baby books. And I said, Lei Suong, what do you mean by those baby books? She said, you know, that stupid cat and the stupid cupcake and that stupid mouse with the cookie. So those of you who are familiar with those beautiful children's books understand that she didn't like that book series that she had been exposed to in her high school classroom. I began to find some literature in English that was accessible to her. She wanted to read love stories more than anything. So I found some appropriate ones, and she became a voracious reader in English. I started to get to know her a little more to see if she wanted to read in any of her languages. She could speak Burmese, Chin, and Zo, 3 other languages. So English was her 4th. And she was very sad when she told me she couldn't read and write in any of her languages because she had limited schooling in her home country and as well as the refugee camp. But oh, she wanted to. So what an opportunity to help her develop biliteracy. Here's another student I had the opportunity to work with. We'll call him Marcos. And he was at a school where I was working with many amazing teachers there. And they told me for most of the school year, he just sat in the back. He didn't engage with the other students, even the other Spanish-speaking students. Marcos was from Guatemala. And from the information the teachers had, they thought his first language was Spanish. They thought he might not be able to read and write very well in Spanish, maybe didn't have a very strong education back in Guatemala. He just didn't participate a lot, and they were concerned about him. So, you know, we tried different things and we just weren't very successful. At the end of the school year, one teacher had some books that were from Guatemala about his country in there. And through that, she realized that his language was Cachiquel, that he could read and write very well in Cachiquel and Spanish as well. So at the end of the school year, in working with this teacher, he wrote an entire poem, a poem he composed himself in Cachiquel. his home language, and then translated into Spanish so the teacher and I had access to it. And that just totally changed the way the teachers and I viewed him. And he came back that next year and was so successful, became a leader in his classes, and joined the soccer team as well. So sometimes having that information about students can be transformative. So I'd like to stop now and see if there are any questions that you have at this point.
Okay, I was just about to write this down, so I'm glad you stopped. There was a point of confusion when you were talking about the student who was expressing frustration with the baby books. Jana wants to know, well, you didn't speak her language, so how did you have that conversation? I'm assuming she had enough English. She had enough English to communicate that to you. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, this is Lei Suong here, and absolutely, she had probably intermediate level of English, and as ESL professionals, I think we become used to cross-cultural communication. But yes, she could state very clearly she hated the baby books.
Got it. Okay. Oh, and then here's another question that came in that you are definitely going to answer this as time goes on. The question is, what resources do you suggest for finding literature in other languages? She's definitely going to get to that. So it's coming. So just hang tight. So that's what we have for now. Perfect timing. And we'll keep on going.
Resources. Those are coming at the end, but yes, I know that's extremely important. First, I want to give you the why, so you have a good rationale for why you were doing this, because we know it's counterintuitive. We create a multilingual ESL classroom to give our students curriculum access in all disciplines, more access to critical thinking and creativity than a monolingual student would have. And I didn't put it there, but I think we do it because we want to know our students, to view them as who they are through their assets, and we care about them. So as we think about curriculum access, we can do it through all the language domains: reading, writing, listening, speaking, viewing, as well as creating and composing. So here are some examples. The first is multilingual reading. I was working with a young woman, this picture represents, named Sara from Colombia, in a high school, and she told me she struggled. I was speaking to her in Spanish, so that's why we had full communication there. But she told me she struggled reading her grade level books in English, but she loved to read in Spanish. And she had read every single book their library had in Spanish, as well as every Spanish book she could get from the local public library. So Sara was a reader. So providing multilingual reading encourages that independent reading. Students can do their own research on a certain topic and find information in a language other than English as well as English. They might be able to get more information if you open it up to their language. I hope all of you in your classes get to have times for sustained silent reading, or maybe you call it dear time, but I think that's really important for students like Sara and our reluctant readers, that they can begin to develop that love of reading, and that they can just start that practice of regularly reading. You might have group assignments where students are looking into maybe one historical figure, such as Martin Luther King. And maybe you've provided some very accessible text for them in English that, of course, is engaging as well. But you might have a student who can't really participate because they don't have the English fluency yet to read the text you have. Well, you can provide a text for this student in their language, and I'll show you some resources later. So then that student can still participate in the class, can participate with the group and engage in discussion in English, because the alternative might be the student didn't participate at all. So L1 reading, or home language reading, can increase participation. You met Profe Ross a few slides ago, and here's how he used purposeful reading in students' first languages. Now, he was in a situation in a high school English class where all of his students spoke Spanish as their home language and were acquiring English. You might have a super diverse classroom and not be able to do this, but he was able to, so he took advantage of the situation. He was teaching the genre of memoir with his students, and their class text was the one you see on the right, The Distance Between Us, a memoir by Reina Grande, the young reader's edition. So a Lexile level that was accessible to his students who were acquiring English. But he noticed that in the Spanish edition of the book, and not the young reader's Spanish edition, the actual Spanish edition of the regular original book, La Distancia entre Nosotros, that the prologue was so beautiful, that it was such a great example to teach a memoir. So he had his students first read the prologue to the book in Spanish, in the original book, to really highlight memoir before they went to the young readers edition in English. And later on, the students wrote their own memoirs. So that was his purposeful engagement. Maybe some of you are in multi-level classes where you have students who are beginners all the way through advanced in their English acquisition. Here are a group of young women I got to work with in a summer book club, and they wanted to read a love story. They wanted to read The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. Not all of them had enough English language proficiency to do that in English. So you can see some of them read in Spanish, some of them read in English. Some of them wanted both books, to first read a chapter in Spanish and then go back to English and see how much they could understand. And then our class activities were focused on English language acquisition, but drawing from the shared reading. In Holly Genova, my co-author's class, or after school, she has a book club. So all of these students voluntarily come to her book club after school once a week, and they participate in discussing a novel they have selected. So one semester they read The Hate You Give. Some of them read in English, some in Spanish, as you can see in the picture, but there are 3 different home languages represented in this book club, and they engaged in their discussion in English. If the Spanish version wasn't available for some students, they wouldn't have been able to come and participate in book club. So we know that these reading skills will transfer across languages, skills such as building stamina as readers, comprehending vocabulary in context, skimming, inferencing, and then identifying features of different genres, such as memoir that Profe Ross was teaching. And most important, we want students to have a love of reading. You met Lei Suong a minute ago. Throughout the summer, I found some novels, such as this one, that were English language appropriate, age appropriate, that she loved. And she asked me, she said, "Miss, can I highlight my favorite parts?" And I'm thinking, it's just going to be, a paragraph here, a paragraph there. That's it. So I said, fine, highlight your favorite parts. Every single page in that entire novel looked like this. She said, "Miss, they are all my favorite parts. I love this book so much." So of course, at this point, I'm like, keep the book, it's yours. But that's what we want for our students, to have a love of reading more than anything else. So as we go into writing, are there any questions that have come up about a multilingual classroom through reading?
Yes, we have 4 or 5 questions right now in the Q&A area. We'll take them one at a time. We have a question about grading. So this commenter understands the importance of allowing newcomers and English learners to use their native language. But when it comes to grading and assessing, how does that work? Are we grading and assessing only in English, or do we allow them to submit things in their native language? But if I don't speak the native language, how do I assess it? Are there any practical tips around that or thoughts on that?
Absolutely, that's a good question. I think you have to think about the purpose of your class. Are you in a strictly like ESL class, or are you in an ELA class, English Language Arts class, where students are maybe all acquiring English? Because I think that at that point you might also want to consider their literacy development, which isn't tied to any language, just overall literacy development. And then you grade for that, maybe on participation, on completion. I walk into some classes and see students engaged in books, sometimes even novels in different languages I don't speak. And sometimes they might even be, writing like a response to it in their language. I think you can look at completion or participation for that.
Great, thank you. Another question that came in was about students who are very comfortable using their L1 during instruction. As a teacher, I want to encourage that, but maybe I don't speak that language. So I'm not exactly sure what this question is. It says, what should we as a teacher do if the multilingual learners tend to be more convenient or comfortable using their L1 during instruction? I would think we would want to encourage that. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Oh yeah. I mean, you have to know your students and what your situation is. And certainly sometimes students need a little push to use the target language, which is in our case in English. And I'm going to share 4 students like that with you at the end of the presentation that needed a little push to want or to have the confidence to use English.
Great. And then a question about parents and administrators who maybe have a false assumption that a home language can hinder language acquisition. So this is a big question. We might want to leave this for the end, but how can we overcome some of these challenges so that all the stakeholders are informed about the benefits of the multilingual approach? That's a
Yeah.
great
I
question
mean, I would
and a
say
huge
read,
question.
read, read. There's so much research support. I include some of that in my book, and there's so many other researchers doing great work in that area. If you look at translanguaging, the multilingual turn. But here's the best thing that I've seen to work. When I first get students who are going to take a graduate course with me, they're all teachers. I have them engage in 10 hours of second language acquisition, just 10 hours. I mean, our students get like 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. In 10 hours, when they need to engage in second language acquisition, they learn so much. So they're like, oh, I needed to clarify something in English, my language. Oh, I got so confused because I couldn't use English and my head hurt. I think if we can walk in our students' shoes and all try and understand that, we can see that it just makes sense sometimes.
Great
But read the research
suggestion.
for sure.
These are great questions, everybody. Keep them coming. I want to make one more, I want to highlight one more question because I don't want to slow us down too much, but Yoshiko commented about the use of Google Translate as a survival mechanism for content area teachers. So the translation by computer doesn't always reflect contexts and can be problematic, but that's something that's out there for when people can't find things in other languages. So, but you are going to show us a lot of different resources that people can
Yes.
tap into.
I have a love-hate relationship with Google Translate. It is a wonderful resource. And if we purposefully, I'm going to keep going back to that word, purposefully use it, it's great. I was in a class where students were doing writing. That's a good segue to multilingual writing. And they would just put something in their devices or computers in Google Translate in their language, get the English copy paste. I'm like, oh no, second language acquisition is not going to occur through copy paste. That they, even if they thought they would struggle trying to write something in English, they needed to understand the process and engage in trying the best they could to write as much as they could in English, the target language, in order to acquire the target language. So purposefully use Google Translate and then purposefully ask your students to set it aside. But with multilingual writing, I think Google Translate is certainly something that comes up a lot.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to encourage everybody to continue submitting the questions. We will be pausing again later and taking questions at the end as well. So keep them coming. Back to you, Mandy.
Okay. So now we've talked about multilingual reading, which I could spend hours talking about, giving it 10 minutes. I didn't do it justice. So I hope you will keep looking into that. But I do want to go into multilingual writing because we want our students to produce language. And in getting them to do it in their home languages as well as English can build stamina. And let me explain what I mean by writing stamina. I was working with one group of students and we started off our day with journal writing, some free journal writing in their notebooks that I had bought them. And I was so excited. We were going to fill up the notebooks over the summer. And I had these 2 boys who I loved, but every day they would spend about 10 seconds maximum putting a couple words in their journal and they would say, "Miss, I'm finished." And we were supposed to try and build our stamina through the summer and to be able to write for 3 minutes, then 5 minutes, and so on. So I spent so much time talking with these boys and telling them, can you give me more detail? Can you say more about that? Even if you can't put it in English, can you put more in your language? I did that so much that these boys taught me how to say, put more detail in Chin, their language. Chin piat da amia. So the whole class would often just yell out Chin piat da amia when they would try and tell me they were finished with the journal writing. So stamina is important. It's great for journaling, free writing, which is part of organization, and then of course, building those study skills. So here are some examples. And these examples are not something you do all the time. You are purposeful in a particular situation with a particular student. This student had a high stakes test, writing test to take, needed to pass the test to graduate. It made sense for this student to plan her essay in her home language, as you see on the left, to really get those ideas together, make sure they aligned and they made sense, that she was answering the prompt using transition words, had supporting evidence. Once she had that, she was able to go and put it in English, and the student passed the test. So sometimes organizing in the L1 makes sense. Here's a student in that summer institute I taught, where I would give them a prompt and want them to write to build stamina. She wrote about her goals for the future in her language, Korean. Totally fine with me. She wrote the entire time. Later on, when they were going to write more, they needed to choose something from their journal. She chose to take these ideas that came from her L1 and write about them in English so she could share with me and the whole class. But this is where it started. In one class, I was reading the lovely middle grade novel, Sylvie and Aki, true story about girls' friendships during the time of World War II. So it talks about Japanese internment camps, as well as ending school segregation in California. So you can see some of the big vocabulary words these students needed to understand: segregation, discrimination, equality. One student asked me if he could write them also in Chinese in his notebook. So of course my answer was absolutely. I should have told the whole class at the beginning, please write these big vocabulary words in your language if you want to and if you can. That really helped him as we engaged with the text in English. Now, some of you ask about reluctant speakers. So sometimes our reluctant English speakers might also be reluctant English writers. This is what I did in Holly Genova's class one year. She was expertly using this beautiful novel, Inside Out and Back Again, for like the last quarter of the school year with her students. They were engaging with it. It was great in all of her classes. But she had about 4 students who she felt they just weren't engaging with the text. And so she asked me if I would pull out these 4 students and work with them. 2 of the students were young men from Myanmar, and 2 were young women from Mexico. So I pulled them out and we did some different reading together. Here is some of the reading we did. I cannot read that, and it was okay. The assignment was to locate an article on Wonderopolis, a website I'll show you later, that had to do with the book. So it had to do with the refugee experience, so they would understand the novel they were reading with the class more. They needed to read the article in their language and discuss the main ideas with their partners, because I had 2 students who spoke Burmese and 2 that spoke Spanish. Then they needed to determine what are the keywords they needed in English to talk to one another, to share across languages. So the 2 young men found, here's the book they were reading in class. They found an article related to the book and they put the title. The title was in Burmese. Here is a small excerpt from the article. They read the article, and then in this section, I wanted them to write notes in their language. Although, yes, they could read in Burmese, their language was Chin. So they discussed it and wrote about it in Chin. And then in order to share with the other 2 people in our little group, they needed to understand some key words. And you can see these are big words. They needed to understand those in English in order to be able to communicate their learning with the 2 young women from Mexico. And the women from Mexico, they did the same thing. They read an article about the refugee experience. They took notes in their languages and had to find the key words to share with the 2 boys from Myanmar. Because for these 2 girls, they really had a lot of reluctance to speak in English. And maybe you've seen this with some of your students. I've seen it with multiple students. Whenever they started to produce English, their hands went to their mouth like that. And this was before the time of the mask. So we had a hard time making meaning. So they would be speaking in Spanish, fine. They start speaking English, they talk like this. So it's not good for communication. I wanted them to put their hands down and to be able to feel confident that they could communicate in English. It wasn't complete sentences, but they could communicate. That worked so well for these 4 students. They started speaking with one another that I decided to continue the activity. So now they were going to share from their cultures. Again, 2 students who spoke Burmese and Chin, 2 students who spoke Spanish. Our common language, of course, is English, which we have to use to communicate with each other. So these are the 2 books that I gave the young women from Mexico. Beautiful books that have great illustrations by Carmen Lomez Garza. And the girls were to find things in the book they could connect with that they wanted to share about their culture. So here is their note page where we're finding the key words that will help them share in English and give them confidence to share something in English. So they had the pictures to support them as they shared with our group. Here's an example of the posadas that they shared about. And you can see each part of the book has an illustration with a little section to read in English and Spanish. So they could read in Spanish to support them. They loved this picture. They wanted to share with the other students how their grandmother in Mexico had killed chickens when they had a celebration. So they got to talking about that and sharing authentically using English. Then the boys jumped in and they shared how they had experiences killing chickens. Of course, then they were asking me, Miss, do you know how to do that? And I don't know how to kill a chicken like that. So they thought I was a pretty poor example for an educated adult when I couldn't do something as essential like this. But it was great, authentic communication in English. And then the boys did the same. They had books that represented their culture in Burmese and English. Here's an example. And then they needed to find the key words in English, which they can draw from the English text, to share with the whole group something that they want to share about their country or their culture. So here are some of these students right here who shared across their languages and across their cultures. Reluctant speakers who started speaking and writing. So the next part of curriculum access is multilingual speaking and listening. And the past example ties into this perfectly, but we need to get our students involved in producing language and then hearing language and comprehending it. So one way that you can take a multilingual approach is through word walls, explaining concepts in all languages. I work with a great algebra teacher of newcomers who uses technology to find videos in her students' languages to explain the algebraic concept. Then they move on to working with the concept in English. They can always discuss with a group or partner, but I know some of you are in classrooms where there's always at least one student that doesn't have a common language partner. If I'm in a classroom like that, I become that student's partner, or make sure and pair that student with someone who has higher English proficiency and they can communicate that way. Presentations and family engagement are other examples. So let me go on. Actually, let's stop right here. Liz, are there any more questions that came in before I go on to critical thinking and creativity?
Okay, let's see. There was a question that came in about if and how you've involved parents in your multilingual classrooms. And then another person saying, Katie says she loves the idea of having the teachers take part in SLA. And she was wondering how you kind of structured that. You said it was 10 hours or something like that. So she loved that idea and was looking for, I guess, maybe a little bit more detail on that.
Yeah, so as far as with the SLA, I give them lots of opportunities. I mean, there's so many websites you can sign up for, free apps. If they can actually go to a class, that's ideal. And sometimes I have them go into a class at their school somewhere. I mean, through the internet, there's just so much they can engage in. And then also with literature and books, depending on what their proficiency is in that level. But I think it's a great way for me to show them rather than tell them. Like, they need to experience it themselves. And I remind them, they spent 10 hours, their students will spend, nearly 10 hours in one school day. So it gives us some perspective. Any other questions? Did I miss something, Liz?
No, we had one that came in just a second ago. Um, What will you do if the high school student hasn't been in school for a long time and he or she can't understand either native language or English? Okay, so I will put the link to the language survey in the chat because we might have missed that. And I don't know if everybody got that link. It's linked in the handouts as well, but I'll put the link in the chat. So having that language survey might be helpful.
Yeah,
And
and just
then
remember, is it that they cannot read in their language? They still have their native language and they can communicate in any way. So I would just, be really specific with, what you're thinking. And Lei Suong is an example who could not, at least very proficiently read in her languages, but she certainly wanted access to that.
great. Thank you.
So, speaking and listening, we just need to get our students involved in producing languages, having clarification checks at certain point in the class. And then sometimes for maybe our monolingual students, we have the standards, they do this in one language. Maybe for some of our multilingual students, we want them to be able to produce something, maybe a presentation or a poem in more than one language. So here are some examples. A lot of times we think, how can our English instruction leverage students' critical thinking and creativity as multilinguals? But even if we're not, so it's possible that our students might have access to different kinds of critical thinking and creativity than we do, or than a monolingual student does. So critical thinking is the first thing I want to look at. Think about translating. Maybe some of your students are already translating all the time. So this is a way to formalize it more in the classroom. Researchers Goodwin and Jimenez say that translating highlights strengths of bilingualism and requires students to do close reading, so close reading of a text, as they move back and forth between an evolving translation and the original text. So I will show you some examples of how students engage in critical thinking through translating. Paula is a student I worked with, and she wrote a Where I'm From poem. You could Google Where I'm From poem by Georgella Line and see many templates pop up. Here's an excerpt from hers in English. She decided she needed to leave these words in Spanish. That's critical thinking. She made that decision to leave chorizo and mole in Spanish. Here is her Spanish translation. Now, when we got to this last line, whose long gone limbs I remember as if they were my own. Woo, that is a difficult line to translate. So she worked with another student for quite a while, determining the best way to translate that line. And that's critical thinking. Here's a student who produced a Where I'm From poem bilingually, and this poster is on the hall in their class, in their school, to show that they are bilingual, biliterate, bicultural. Having a multilingual approach also gives our students access to so much creativity. If some of y'all listen to really popular music, particularly transnational music like reggaeton, you know the creativity that is possible, the linguistic flexibility and the nimbleness with words when you have a multilingual approach. So our students might already be exposed to this, but this is our way to invite it in the classroom. So first, I would make sure you have some great mentor text, besides the song lyrics that you can easily get on the internet, of trans-language writing for your students. So Paula, who wrote the poem in English and Spanish, she had access to these texts in the classroom I was working in. She wanted to take them home and read them on her own. Of course, yes, you can take a bilingual book and at home and read it. That is great. Here's a poem that really inspired her. Bilingual love poem, and I'll just read a few lines. Your smile is un rayo de sol, picked from your sonrisa, planted as a seed within the sun of my soul with an ardiente passion, ardent pasión. So you can see the poem assumes a bilingual English-Spanish reader. She loved it. It really represented who she was. So after she wrote her poem in English and then translated into Spanish, she asked me if she could write a third poem. And how often do we have students asking us if they could write extra? So of course, I did not know what she was going to come up with, but my answer was yes, Paula, you can write more. And this is an excerpt from her trans-language poem that really showcases her creativity and critical thinking as a bilingual, as she moves in and out of the English and Spanish, having to decide with each word, should I put it in English and Spanish? What's best for this reason? What would work better for that reason? So I think this is just an excerpt as well. It really showed her creativity. So back to a previous question someone had, how can you find these texts for your multilingual ESL classroom? So I think these are all the check boxes you need to fill to start. So first, look for texts that are in English, but have loat words. So here are just some of my favorites that I've used with students, because this can inspire their writing, because their writing in English might have loat words in there because they're writing from their cultural experiences. Here's a book that's another example of that a biology teacher used in her class. It is mainly in English, but has some Wolof in the book. And she had a student who spoke Wolof, and the student was so excited to share how to pronounce these words and what they meant. So they didn't need to use the glossary at the back of the book because they had a language expert right there in the classroom, which really made that student feel confident. This is an excerpt of one Burmese student's how-to essay, because they had seen books in English that had some loat words or phrases that were used purposefully. So critical thinking is involved. They were able to insert words in certain places. They write, in Burma, a lot of people use tanaka to make themselves beautiful. It costs a lot of money, so many people make it themselves. Tanaka is a paste made from the bark, roots, and wood of tanaka trees mixed with water. It is very easy to make. First, you put some water on the tanaka dong, which is a special plate, to make the paste. So they knew they needed to explain to me, the person who did not speak Burmese, what a tanaka dong was. So look, as language teachers, you'll probably love this. They have a comma, which is a special plate, comma. I just thought that was a great authentic use of language there. They told me that if I used tanaka, I could be beautiful as well. So I appreciated their advice. I also think you need to have text in your multilingual ESL classroom that are bilingual books. I love this graphic novel that is bilingual in English and Spanish. Great book. I also love these books from the I See the Sun series, because look, there is language here and language here. And we're used to seeing the English on top and the language other than English on bottom. But here we see Nepali on top. And I think that tells students your language is important. Also, make sure that you have some engaging loat books for your students, like Sara, who you met earlier, who really want to read and engage in novels and really getting into a story, but they need it in their language, or maybe they want it in their language. They prefer it in their language to have the most access to the story. So definitely make sure these books are in your classroom. And then my favorite for Paula and all the students that I work with who show their extreme intelligence when they start playing with language as multilinguals, have some trans-language books. I already showed you the Salsa series that Paula loves. You will find some trans-language poems in this Ink Knows No Borders book, as well as children's books like Our Celebración or other books by Susan Middleton Elliott. It shows how our students, just the possibilities they have of being creative with language as they use their critical thinking. Make sure you have bilingual poetry as well, which comes in many different forms. It could be a novel that is first in English and then in another language, side by side, or two completely separate books that have the same content but in different languages. I've used all of these with students and they've loved them. Because when we show them side by side writing, showing both languages, it can inspire them in what they do. In this book, you see side by side poetry in many different languages with artwork as well, which inspired this Jordanian who wrote a poem in English, translated into Arabic, as well as you can see the whole poster that was on display at the school, because she wanted to know, everyone in the school to know, this is who she was. More than an English learner, more than a student who needed to acquire English. She had all of this. So some resources for acquiring this literature. And remember, you're adding it to your collection. You already have engaging and accessible text in English, and I hope you're continually adding to that. But this is something else for you to think about. If you want some free books, Newsella has great informational text in English and Spanish, and in different Lexile levels as well. Wonderopolis is a great website, and I'm going to take you there and show you Wonderopolis, just to show you how it works. So this is text good that is appropriate for probably most intermediate and above students. And already right here, I searched in Wonderopolis for a topic that might be of interest to your students now, the Olympics. So let's say they choose this one. How many sports are in the Olympics? Here is the text. Great text. It gives some support for vocabulary. But let's say some students want or need to read it in their language. Click listen. From there, you're going to be in the immersive reader feature, and you can click this book. From there, choose a language. I'm just going to choose Arabic right now. Change it to the document, and you have the text in Arabic. I do not promise that it is a perfect translation. I've had many students use this, including some adult students who were highly proficient in their language, and they tell me that it's pretty good. So on any language other than Spanish and French, I have to take their word that it's pretty good. But you can see the entire article is translated here. They can go back to the original at any point and compare languages, and they can also listen to it. And then here I just put some other publishers, which are some of my go-to places to find books and languages other than English, especially Worlds of Words, because all of these books have been curated by people who focus on culturally authentic literature. And you can search by country. So for example, when I was searching Guatemala, that's how I got that book that had some phrases in Cachiquel in it that led us to understand, oh, Marcos could read and write in Cachiquel and Spanish. And we had just totally missed a little bit of who he was. Once you have this literature, here are some possible assignments. I like starting with poetry because you can make it very structured or keep it loose, but your students can write a bilingual poem. They can write it primarily in English, but put a low word or phrase when they use their critical thinking to think that it's necessary, and then use their English language to explain it as they need to. They can have side-by-side bilingual writing, which will really engage them in translation, or like Paula, they can weave in and out of their languages in translanguage writing. And you can find all of these poetry templates online. I usually go to readwritethink.org. That's where I find them, but you could also Google them, and I use those for structured poetry. So just to sum up, why should you, as an English teacher, a TESOL professional, create a multilingual ESL classroom when the E is for English, right? It's counterintuitive. But when we do that, we give our students greater access to the curriculum. We engage them in critical thinking and give them a very unique opportunity to express the creativity that they have as bi and multilinguals. So remember, with curriculum access, it's about academic content. You might help them organize and plan. Maybe with a partner, they clarify meaning. Or you just give them access to participate in class. And if the choice is them sitting in the back of the room, disengaged, or participating, let's do everything we can to get our students participating. They can engage in critical thinking as they compare and contrast their languages in an engaging way, like through writing poetry. They can make hard decisions as they think about which are the best linguistic decisions in a certain circumstance. And then they can develop biliteracy, because that's what we want for our bilingual students. More than just English language proficiency. We have really high standards for them, knowing that they can reach so much. I hope that you will have fun and it will be just very affirming for you as you discover the rich languages in your ESL classroom. Back to my best teaching experience ever this spring on a concrete, very cold concrete floor in Dallas, as working with some young men who will probably be students in some of your classrooms this fall. But yes, they all spoke Spanish and were acquiring English. I was there, the ESL teacher, but they told me about their languages. And this is their writing, them telling me about Kekchi and Popchi and Kanjabal and the rich languages they have there. So I hope that you will stay connected with me. There is my website, my email, my social media handles, and then a link to the book, But Does This Work with English Learners, where Holly Genova and I lay out a more detailed plan toward working with emergent bilinguals, particularly in secondary classrooms, and then how we can really see them as who they are, multilinguals, and leverage their languages for their success. So thank you for coming, and I'll take some more questions now if there's anything that's come in, Liz.
Yes, we have a few questions, a couple more questions that are coming in, but first, let me do this to let everybody know what's coming up next week. And surprise everybody, we are going to give away some free Saddleback books today. So stay tuned, hang on to the very end, okay? Next week, if you are a teacher of newcomers, you definitely want to check this out. We have 2 teachers from the Newcomer Academy in the Louisville, Kentucky area, Jefferson County. Hisham Roida and Stacy Conkamp. They are coming to talk about project-based learning and how they implemented this at their Newcomer Academy with their students. It's going to be a great session for you to learn about PBL and specifically PBL with newcomers. So please go to our website to register for that. Alternatively, you should be receiving an email prompting you to register for this, and hopefully we will see you next week. And in just a few minutes, we are going to announce our winners. We will be giving away an additional book set of our new Go ELL Literacy Library. This is one of our newest libraries. If you need more information on this, I did a webinar on this recently. It's on our YouTube channel. And this is our tween learners, and these books are organized into content area genres. So these are really cool because they are age respectful and they are very accessible, and yet they integrate some really strong content area vocabulary. So, and they're just beautiful books. I will be announcing those winners shortly, so hang on for that. All right, let's go on to these questions. Oh my gosh, the chat is firing up right now. I got too many things going on here.
I'm going to try and
Okay.
type some things into your list, but go ahead and you can.
Okay, everybody's saying thank you. Okay. All right, very good. So in terms of questions, the Wonderopolis, do you know if that requires the immersive reader add-on or extension?
Every device I've ever used, I could immediately access it that way, just from the website.
Okay, great. So it sounds like just from the website, Chris, that would be perfect. Okay, and then we want to go back to the, I guess, involving all stakeholders and convincing them that the multilingual approach is the way to go. And you said you had done the SLA piece 10 hours. And somebody was saying, oh, that seems like kind of a lot. I don't know that I could sell that. So I was thinking you could probably
you could do it less. Yeah,
you could do it less, maybe.
Graduate course with me. I mean, I really think we need to walk in our students' shoes just a little bit. But if you can put them in a class for 1 hour, I am engaging in French acquisition to really try and remember what it's like to be a language learner, because my Spanish is at the point where I don't feel so much like I'm acquiring it anymore, even though I am. I'm probably intermediate French, and in my class last week, I was lost at one point, and I had to leave the breakout room and go back to the professor and use my emerging language skills to say, I don't understand the instructions. So it reminded me as a teacher, before I send students in groups to do things, before I send them to breakout rooms, do more than one example. I needed about 3 or 4 examples. Confirm that they know what the instructions are, what they're supposed to do before they do that. So just that one experience was such a great memorable moment for me with second language acquisition. So I think we can learn a lot in a little time.
Wonderful. Thank you. And then we've had people in the chat kind of sharing apps and resources that they like. So Chris put another question in here, and it was regarding some resources that Narita commented on in the chat and wanted to know, hey, all of those apps that you mentioned, were those allowable on school devices or what? My guess is, Chris, that yes, and her case that she was allowed to put those on school devices on their phones. She says on their phones. Okay, so she had them put them on their phones. So that answers that question.
And like Newsella and Wonderopolis are educational sites, so that should be fine. I
Yes.
work with school districts that have strict guidelines as well, so.
Yeah, that definitely happens. So what were some of those? Like, it was like Adobe Scan and a few, these are just ideas that teachers are sharing in the chat, but every district is different in terms of what they allow on a school device. So in this particular instance, it sounds like she had the students put them on their personal devices. So good answer to that question. Thank you. So this last question comes in from Tanzil. In the translanguaging process, don't you think that when the multilingual learners feel comfortable with their code mixing or code switching utterances, then they become fossilized? Has that come up in your research at all as being a concern or a roadblock?
I think as we are acquiring language, we can never just become comfortable. We always have to be purposeful to push ourselves forward. So yes, you are going to have to push them to go to the next level in their English reading. You will have to give them, a gentle push. I think linguist Lourdes Ortega uses that terminology, the push. You will have to give them that gentle, teacher appropriate push to write more in the English language, to speak more, especially. I see most struggles with speaking, but absolutely, we're always going to need to push more. And remember, it's purposeful at the times and place for different languages and to what degree.
Thank you. Krista, thank you so much. I brought this question up earlier, but I lumped it in with another question and we overlooked it. So Krista's question was, she works with adults and she was wondering, is there a parental involvement component in this process that you've seen or studied or used?
Absolutely. And I found when teachers start taking a multilingual approach, parental involvement can skyrocket. One of my favorite multilingual assignments that's authentic, have a student interview a family member, which is probably going to need to be in the home language, right? They can be interviewing them about, a specific thing that maybe the class is focusing on, careers, or maybe things they've learned from their parents, dichos or sayings, things like that they interview their family member about, but they come back to class and they're going to need to use English to share it. So now they have to take, an interview they did with a parent and figure out how they want to share that in English. Same thing with these books, especially if they're able to go home. Great way to involve the family.
Thank you so much. And I'm going back and forth here. This has been great. Everybody's been so active and so engaged. Forgive me if I look a little scatterbrained because I'm trying to keep I'm trying to keep up with all the great comments and thoughts. Yes, let me go ahead and put my email in the chat. There you go. So please feel free to contact me and share that information with me. I would really appreciate that. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Let me just make sure we didn't forget any questions. No, we answered all of those. All right. Great. Perfect. So let's finish up our time today by announcing our free book winners. Now, these book winners were drawn randomly from all registrants. So if you're not here live and you're watching this video and we call your name, like it's your lucky day. So they sent me the winners, and we have Anna Sanchez of Midland, Texas, and Crystal Jazabski from Lee County, North Carolina. Sorry, Crystal, I feel like I need to practice with that name. I need to learn how to say it accurately. We will be reaching out to you to let you know how we're going to get these books to you, and you'll share with us shipping information, and we'll get those prizes to you. So thank you very much, Dr. Mandy Stewart, for this great session. Everybody is really happy. Like I can tell from the chat, this is a very enthusiastic conversation today. So
Yeah. Thank you
um,
all for coming. No, if you get to work with students acquiring English, you have the best jobs in the world. The hardest, but the best, and I think potentially the most rewarding. So have a great school year and the rest of the summer if you still have summer.
yes, enjoy the rest of your summer. Take advantage of it because the school year is around the corner, right? Okay, connect with Saddleback on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Find us on whatever your favorite social media platform is, and we would love to hear from you. And thank you so very much for all that you do. And we will see you next week for a conversation around project-based learning with newcomers. Have a great week, everybody.